Hey folks, welcome back to our channel, Tampa Florida Living. We're giving you another raw podcast here today. It's going to be a fun one. We are talking about what you can expect in 2024 with the real estate market. I've got Bryan Marx from Gershman Mortgage. He's a top dog on the mortgage side of things here in Tampa. And you've seen him probably before on our channel. He's always given us great insight. And of course, we've got good old Phil from our team to give us his perspective on things. Today, we're just going to jump into it, man. We're going to talk about different topics. You know, I keep getting questions about, should you buy a home or should you rent? You know, is now a good time? And there's going to be, we're going to play a little bit of devil's advocate. It's like, yes, you should buy. No, you shouldn't. And I know a lot of you are thinking, oh, great. They've got two realtors and you got a mortgage rep. So they're always going to tell me to buy. That's not the case. It's not the case today. So we're going to talk about, should you be a buyer? Should you hold off? Should you sit on that sideline and wait? What are some of the strategies if you do become a buyer? Then, who should buy? What does that type of person look like? Because again, I'm going to tell you the no BS version, right? Which is no, not everybody should be a buyer right now. And then let's talk about some of the investors, because we've been getting a lot of investors coming at us with different questions and, even homeowners that say, hey, well, maybe I should rent my house, and I'll hold on to it. Well, we're going to talk about that and what that might look like. And then at the end, we're going to tie a bow on this thing. We're going to have Bryan pull out his good old crystal ball and tell us what he's going to see the rest of, through the rest of 2024 and what that market looks like in case some of you are looking to buy in 2024. So getting things started, Bryan, tell the folks hello.
Hey, thanks for having me, Adam. And Phil.
Yeah, man, Phil, mic check.
We're here. Testing 1, 2, 3.
All right. Everybody's on board. So should you buy? Should you rent? What does that look like? Bryan, talk to me. What are you hearing on your end when people are calling in? Because I know I got a lot of questions on my end.
Really, should you rent or buy? The age-old, quote that we've been running on the last 10, 15 years of it's always cheaper to buy than to rent doesn't really work anymore. Now it's really based on personal situations. Some people it's better to buy. Some people it's better to rent. Something I'm telling you right now is, look, unless you're putting down a big down payment, once you factor in your taxes, your insurance, everything, the whole shebang, realistically, it's more expensive to buy than it is to rent right now. So is that right for you and your family?
I think it all goes down to situation, right? So like, I'll give you my situation. I was just talking to you about this the other day because you were running numbers for me on what it would look like to jump out of my 3% mortgage and get into a 7%, right? And anybody freaks out when they see that. They're like, oh man, my mortgage is going to double or triple, right? So my scenario is that I treat all of my houses as investments. Well, I went in, I flipped my home or renovated it, right? I've lived in it for 3 years. So now I can sell it tax-free, all the capital gains up to $500K. And now I've maximized my investment, right? From now on, everything that's going to happen is going to be, I'm going to have to maintain the home. The roof is getting, everything was brand new roof to windows to you name it. So now everything just starts to get older and you have to maintain it to keep it newer. So when I go to sell it, we're good, right? It almost makes sense for me to cash that out, get all that equity, which might be a few $100K, put it into a, I think you were talking about money market, 5% and change. 5%. And I could almost use that interest to go rent while I look for my next investment, right? Mm-hmm. So a scenario like that, it now makes me start to look at, wow, should I be moving on this? Or should I enjoy my low mortgage and just kind of look for my new investment that way? But now I'm sitting on a ton of equity that's really not going up because I'm at the mercy of the market. And I don't really see the market going up 20% next year. So again, I'm in a little bit of a pickle, but I really can't go wrong either way, right? Mm-hmm. So that's a good scenario there. The other scenario I think we talked about is people relocating, right? Like Phil, you take a bunch of calls from us with all the folks coming in. You're helping people relocate. What are you seeing with people coming in and some of those questions?
Well, especially when I get a call from out of state, a lot of it has been in the new construction area and, locking in under contract, let's say in April, but not actually closing until July or August. And Bryan, if you can kind of fill us in a little bit on when they actually lock in the rate of the mortgage.
So we're talking, so just to clear that up, you're saying that some of the people calling in right now are calling in and they're shopping here looking at new construction. That's where a lot of the inventory is, right?
Right.
And then they're kind of like, okay, how do I line this up? They have to sell their home or whatever that looks like. Now they're looking to get a new mortgage on a new construction. However, you're asking about, can they lock the rate in? Because it might be a 6 to 9 month build sometimes, right?
Correct.
So you can lock in the rate. I mean, as soon as you're in a contract, there's extended lock programs where you can lock up to 280 days. It's kind of an evaluation. You're basically trying to bet what the market's going to do at that point. Most people right now aren't locking in their rates on these new builds because the general forecast is to see lower rates towards the end of the year once the Fed finally does start cutting rates. So if you lock in at the higher rate, you're kind of stuck with that. So on the new builds, we typically lock in once we're within 60 days, once we've got that move-in letter and an official date of closing from the builder.
Yeah, and I know this is kind of like a sticky question for Bryan, right? Because typically, like 90% of the time, right, especially right now, the new construction builders are going to kind of push you towards their lenders because they're going to give tons of incentives. And if they're giving us $25,000 incentive, it makes sense for people to use the new construction builder, right? With that being said, something that's actually happening on the new construction side is they're getting some of that flex money, that $25,000, and they're buying bonds or they're locking in rates at 4.5%, 4.99%, 5.25%. And so, yes, we are finding some really good deals locking it in, Phil, with specific homes with builders. So that's something always good to call our team and check in with that if you're looking at new construction. But here's what I'll tell you. I love getting people pre-approved with Bryan first. I mean, and I appreciate you taking that time with our folks. I love getting them pre-approved with you first because there's been a ton of times where some of these new construction lenders are a little vanilla. They look at it, and if it's not the perfect field, they're like, nope, can't do it. If they deny you, we can, in a lot of cases, we can get you those same lender credits and use Bryan, which Bryan is a stud, man. If Bryan can't do it, you're not getting pre-approved, basically. But I love having that confidence with Bryan first. Now I know, okay, we can get a loan and we can go shopping, and this is what more or less we can shop for. Because a lot of times we are looking at we're not looking at, hey, $500,000 house. That's the way to back into it. But the way to back into it is to look at your monthly payment, right, Bryan? And you always put a ton of focus on that monthly payment. So, and I think that's one thing you were telling me the other day is like, guys, when you're shopping at homes, when you're trying to figure out, should you buy, should you rent? If you decide to go the buyer route, like start focus on the payment. Don't look at the interest rate as much, right? And that like your kind of your words of wisdom right now?
Yep. I mean, I've had clients before and focus on the payment, find a property they want to make an offer on. They call me, they're like, hey, Bryan, can you run the numbers? This is the perfect property. Oh my gosh, my family's in love with it. My kids have already picked out their rooms. What's the payment? Payment's X. Oh, that's perfect. Hey, what's the interest rate? Well, interest rate's at 7%. Ooh, I can't pay that. It's like, It's a psychological thing. Focus on the payment. Rates can change. You can refinance down the road. You're comfortable with the payment right now. It's guaranteed going forward. Just make the move.
Yeah. So a lot of people, they always kind of like hate on realtors or hate on mortgage reps. We're like, oh, you should buy a house right now. And they're like, dude, you're crazy. It's 7%. It's like, yes, I understand that. The best advice we can give you, though, is if you're one of those people that fit in the bucket to move, that you should be buying, okay, focus on the payment. Be comfortable for the payment. It doesn't matter if it's a 9% interest rate, right? If the payment makes sense for you, you need a roof over your head, and if you're the person that fits in that mold of buying a home, well, then it doesn't matter what the market goes up or goes down because markets are cyclical. You're going to be okay for 10 years with that payment. You could potentially rent it to somebody, right? So there's things around that I feel that, yes, focusing on the payment, making sure you're comfortable, maybe even being a little more on the conservative side of your budget. That's the way to go. Don't stretch. This is not the time to stretch your budget and go on the tip top high end because that crystal ball is a little cloudy, which we'll talk about at the end of this video here. But, let's just kind of recap who should buy and maybe who should not. I'm going to start with nots, right? Who should not buy? Somebody that really is pushing their budget to the limits, that could be a little more conservative in rent, right? Somebody that doesn't know exactly where they want to live. They're just throwing a dart because they don't know Tampa well. Maybe you should rent, or maybe you don't have that feel, right? Maybe you're somebody that is like, hey, can I buy a house and sell it in 2 years and make my money back? Probably shouldn't be a buyer.
Yep.
If that's what you're banking on, right? Real estate's a long game, even though the last 10 years people think it's a short term. And it can be a short term, but you really got to know your stuff. and the numbers have to work. But for the average person, it's a long game, right?
Do you think
maybe
you're going to be getting transferred within your job sometime in the next couple of years? Maybe you shouldn't buy.
Right. So there's a couple scenarios there where you should. Now let's talk about some of the ones that you should, right? I'm going to throw one out there and I want to hear from you guys, but I love it when I hear somebody say, listen, I'm coming from another state, another city, and I got to get out of here. This is a scenario that I'm not happy with anymore. And I've always thought of moving to Florida or moving to Tampa. I've come down there a few times. I've done my research. I know the areas I want to live. And I've kind of pinpointed the places that match my family's lifestyle. This is where I want to be. I can afford X amount, but I'm good being conservative with my price point. And I know that this is a great area that'll hold its value through the ups and downs. You know, I'm good with this either way, and I'm financially stable enough to make that move. This is my choice. I don't want to be a renter. I want to do things to my house, and I'm going to make this my home. That's a perfect person. And by the way, they're selling a house for 500 and they're buying a house for 500. Great move. You know, yes, the interest rate might be okay, but if they're good with the payment, it's a great buyer, great move. Let's do it, man. And I think that that's going to be an okay house for them long term, right?
Right. And Adam, to touch on that too, a lot of the clients we worked with too, they have kids, so it's also getting them in a school district where they're not constantly switching schools, having to make new friends, things of that sort as well.
Yeah, the other day I had somebody come in, and a lot of times people come in, right, and they tell us, hey, I'm gonna rent for a year to figure out where I want to live, and then I'll buy, right? Had somebody with that scenario that did that. They got their kid into one public school, and then they went to buy, but they didn't think that one through all the way. And where they went to buy is now a different area. So now they're switching all three kids, right? Elementary, middle, high school, the kind of a nightmare. And they're like, dude, this is not what we wanted, but I can't buy where we initially rented. So either now I'm a 3 or 4 or 5 year renter while I'm not switching my kids out of these different schools and with all their friends, or I pull the plug now, switch them schools, and I got to go buy in a different area. So I guess, yeah, I mean, there's the potential that you can't always line up the school zone with kids, and that's definitely a scenario. So, man, I think there's definitely, a time to buy, a time to rent. It's not for everybody, but if you want to buy, what are some of those strategies? Let's talk about that, and then we're going to dive into the investment side of things. But Bryan, what are some of those strategies for people right now? Because I think all of this is stemming from high interest rates. I mean, yes, a little bit of the price point moving up, but it's really high interest rates that scare the hell out of people with their monthly payments. So what are some of those different strategies, quick version of what we can do to combat that up front?
So here's a strategy I tell my clients, especially people who are coming from renting to buying. Obviously, buying gives a lot of benefits. You don't have to ask your landlord if you want to paint the wall or change something with the property. And we touched on school zones, districts, people who want to start a family, they want to lay down some roots. They don't want to have to worry of my payment for rent is $2,000 per month right now. Well, next year it just went to $2,500 because rents went up. They want to make sure they're steady going forward. So something I tell people, again, buying is a little bit more expensive than renting right now. So let's say if you're paying $2,000 per month in rent and you say, hey, Bryan, hey, Phil, I want to buy a home within the next 6 to 12 months. That is my goal. I'm setting down some roots for my family. Perfect. Here's what I tell them to do. Based on what kind of property you're looking for, realistically, your payment's probably going to be about $3,000 per month. So let's kind of test ride this situation for a little bit. Every month for the next 6 to 12 months, I want you to take $3,000 per month. $2,000 I want you to pay to your landlord. The extra $1,000, I want you to take that, put that in a high interest money market account through Schwab or Vanguard or Fidelity, where you're getting 5% interest. You can test ride it. Let's see if you're comfortable making that $3,000, or, maybe it's a little bit too much for you, and maybe we need to dial it back at that point. So you can kind of test ride your payment at that point. That's a great strategy that I'm having people do.
And Bryan, also too, with those high yield savings accounts, right? The value in that is you can pull your money out also at any time.
Yep,
without
anytime.
a penalty. Right.
Correct.
I'm going to be a little bit of
a savings account.
Right.
I'm going to be a little bit of a devil's advocate and say, yeah, but those high yield savings aren't going to be around forever. So then what do you do?
Well, they work with the feds, right, Bryan?
Yep. So when those accounts, when the rates eventually drop on those, that means that interest rates have dropped as a whole. So it's all fluid at the end of the day. So then your housing payment would drop if you bought when those rates are lower.
Yep. Right. And so I know a lot of people always talk about, well, when rates drop, you can refinance, right? So what is a good threshold? Is there a threshold that people can kind of look for? And like, is there like a number? I know back in the day, I used to be like, if it drops 2%, refinance. But I mean, nowadays it's a little bit different. It's a higher number. So what is it? What is there a number that we look for? Where it's kind of like
There's
a guide?
Really
where like,
not a number. It's really based on the loan amount, your price range, and whether it makes sense. So when people come to me to refinance, a lot of times lenders will say, yes, perfect, let's refinance right away because they want to make the money on it. They're not actually looking out for the best interest of the client. But when I look at it, I tell people all day who call me, hey, look, this is not a good idea for you. Let's hold off. Let's wait a little bit. I use a 36-month break-even rule. So basically, what it's going to cost you in closing costs divided by how much you're going to save on a monthly basis. As long as we can recoup that within 36 months, perfect. Let's do it.
And if that's in their plan of owning the home, right?
Exactly. So let's say if they say, well, Bryan, I'm probably going to sell the home in 2 years. Perfect. Why are we going to incur the closing costs? Just keep it as it sits. Doesn't make sense.
That's right. That's right.
The math has to work.
Yeah, so I think we've touched on this a lot, right? We've done pretty good around these conversations. Now let's talk about the investment side, because a lot of times people are saying, well, I need to sell a home in order to buy a home, right? So sometimes they're kind of contemplating, well, I've got such a low interest rate. It's dumb for me to let that go, because there's a lot of chatter around that, right? It's like, that's dumb for me to let go of a 2% because you need to leverage money. That's like free money nowadays. It's like, yeah, well, we didn't always think that a few years ago, right? But why does it make sense to hold on to it? We all know that, right? Because maybe you can cash flow a couple $100 a month. Maybe you want to have that rental, right? That extra investment that people always say to hold on to. But there's sometimes where it doesn't make sense. I just gave you a perfect scenario with myself, which I've got all the equity stuck in my house. And yes, you could pull that equity out, but then you're just kind of back in that bad scenario. So in my scenario, it doesn't make sense to just keep my home as a rental unless I'm going to have like 10 plus properties, right? Where I'm really diving into a portfolio of rentals. But to just have one, I don't know that I want to be a landlord. And I think that's my answer. I don't want to, I think you hit on it, right? Before we were talking, you were like, yeah, I mean, Christmas Eve, you get a call that the toilet's overflowing. I don't want to be that guy. I don't even want to have a property manager having to deal with that at this point. But talk to me. When does it not make sense to hold on to a rental, or maybe some of the scenarios where it's like, no, dude, just sell it. So, isn't there a scenario?
I think you've got to run your numbers properly. I think you've got to run the numbers properly. You've got to forecast what you expect going forward. A lot of people look at real estate investing because it's become a hot topic over the last couple of years, and everybody's been getting rich with real estate investing. Well, realistically, we're not going to see the 20 to 25% appreciation gains per year. We're probably going to see a balanced market, 3 to 5%. So this whole get rich quick scheme with real estate, it's not really happening anymore. It's a normal market.
The last 10 years plus, you could have just thrown a dart and you could have won the lottery with any house. Now it's like we have to be a little more selective. We have to be smarter with our choices. Real estate is still a great game, but it's a game you could lose. So you have to be careful with it, right? So, but you were telling me the other day too, it's like the investment side of things is a little bit different. Like Tampa, there's opportunities, but it's not what everybody thinks anymore. It's like, I'll have somebody call me, literally got a call yesterday. Hey, I got $500K. Can you find me a quadplex? I was like, you want Section 8? And he's like, no, I don't. And I was like, well, I mean, everybody's looking for the same thing. And with prices inflated, I've ran the numbers for myself. I mean, I was looking at for a quadplex the other day, and I was like, man, at 1 point something, right? 1.3, let's call it quadplex. Doesn't make sense to own it. The taxes, the insurance, everything else. I'm not going to own. I mean, I'm not going to cash flow that unless I'm putting 50% down. So sometimes it doesn't make sense to have that rental. And I think you even said this, like, let's say you're going to keep your house as a rental and you're cash flowing $500 a month. That's a great number, right? $600 a month. Great number. Yeah. What happens when that AC comes due? What happens when that the roof needs some work? What happens when the floors are torn up or the paint or the whatever you add it up? Having that one rental cash flow $500 a month, it might not be worth it. You could use that money and go reinvest if you want to, or figure it out. You can reinvest in something else. Like you said, 5% right now on a money market, at least right now, is risk-free.
Yep.
Right.
Totally risk-free.
So there's scenarios where it might make sense to just sell it and press the reset button or restart button, right? And investors, it's not always the best market to just come in and just be that investor, right? On the flip side, because we are playing devil's advocate here, Philly boy just got a nice little win yesterday. Yes. And he's picked up a couple properties with his investors. So tell us a little bit of that. I mean, like, what's that look like? Because there are deals out there. I don't want to ever say there's not. Yes. We work with investors too.
Yeah, no, it's been it's definitely in the market right now with it being so tight. The negotiation process has definitely been long and thorough. It's every time I'm running numbers as far as for like the duplex, the triplex, the quadplex with the interest rate. And then Bryan, also too, you're 25% down also on a multi-complex. Mm-hmm. Am I right?
Yep, correct. 25% down on a multi-unit.
Yeah, so you're pulling 7.5% interest rate, and then again, obviously, you have to have 25% down. And then the sales price is really, really hard to get those numbers to really line up the profit. So my kind of approach lately has been trying to use those interest rate as leverage against the price. So we've been seeing, I would say in the last month, I'm seeing a little bit of now properties that have been on for 30 days, getting a price cut, and then sitting a little bit longer. So it's been a little bit more in our advantage, especially if you are trying to invest. You're starting to see a little bit more wiggle room right now.
Yeah, a little bit. I've seen two different things. I've seen one where it's like you're actually getting investors that weren't that wise and they bought it wrong and they think, oh, I'm going to just sell it for this. And then little by little, they're like, wait a minute, it's not that easy. And now they're coming down and dumping it. And you could sometimes get a deal off of them because they got holding costs and they didn't run their numbers.
Yeah, it's like a funny story too, because it's like, oh, well, my neighbor 2 years ago sold it for this price. I just need someone to come from up north and pay cash for it. And they're
waiting for that golden egg, golden goose, and it's like not there. So, but then sometimes you got to think outside the box. Like I think you just picked up a piece of land.
Yes.
That now you kind of worked in with a builder, and the builder you brought him into that deal. So now you guys are kind of working that scenario together, right? Building on a piece of land, sell it out. And you got to have a
team behind you. You have to have a team behind you now. I mean, you have to have the right resources. The timing needs to be correct. I mean, honestly, you need to be patient right now. You got to just wait for it. You can't just hop on it like you did back a year or two ago. You have time.
Yeah. The other thing that I noticed, though, the second part is that different price points on homes that have sold here, right? It's always, I always have done this, but I always look at what is selling in the market, what is stalled out in the market, right? Few years back, let's talk pre-COVID, it was that 750 to like 850 range was always like the kiss of death. Like if you had a house in there, it's like, that's not going to sell because it wasn't much better than like a $700,000 home, but it wasn't as nice as like a $900 or $1 million home, right? Mm-hmm. We're still seeing that right now, not at that price point, a little bit higher, but I'm seeing that there's opportunity in the $1.5 million plus, right? That luxury market, there's a lot of give and take there. So you can make money as a seller by making your house stand out, or if you really didn't upgrade it much and you think, oh, I'm going to slap it on the market and somebody's going to buy it. Well, then you're wrong. And as a buyer coming in, you've got some negotiation, right? If the house is sitting. So I'm seeing a lot of leverage or a lot of movement on that higher end. Whereas I'd say probably that 400 to 550 range is probably the hottest market. Mm-hmm. That's the market where if it's a nice home in a nice area, don't wait because it's not going anywhere. And you can't negotiate that, a whole lot. If it's already been updated, that house is going to be gone because we're still in a market with lower inventory, right? So real quick on the investment side, Phil, I know you touched on this and you were kind of educating me on this, Bryan, as well, is on the investment side, a few things have changes or a few rules have changes. Not only with what you could put down, but then also if you have a house to sell and to buy, I think some of those things have changed as well, right? Can you kind of give us an update on that?
Sure. So a couple things have changed, particularly on the multifamily side. A lot of people right now, hot topics, everybody wants to do house hacking. So for people who don't know what house hacking is, Basically, it's where you buy a multi-unit property. So anywhere between a duplex, triplex, quadplex, you're going to rent out the other units, and that's going to basically help subsidize your mortgage, if not cover all of it. So very, very hot topic right now. Everyone's looking to do that. Previously, if you're going to live in one of those units, you'd have to do 15% down. If it was a duplex, it was a triplex or quadplex, you'd have to do 25% down, which is a huge chunk of money, especially for somebody who's trying to house hack. Typically, they don't have that much in money, and that's the reason that they're doing that. Now, if it's going to be a primary residence, you can get in with 5% down on a duplex, triplex, and quadplex, as long as you're going to live in one of those units. So very big change for the industry. I think it's really going to push multifamily values higher in the 2 to 4 unit range, because there's a huge influx of buyers going to that strategy. Another thing has changed as well, touching on, you've got a current home right now, you want to move. Should I sell it? Should I rent it? We touched on, make sure you run your numbers, budget for that HVAC, budget for the paint, budget for the roof, budget for what if my property taxes change? What if my homeowner's insurance goes up? So really run your numbers. But
I think Phil was saying, though, if you decide you want to hold on to it, you want to keep it, not always a bad strategy, right? Maybe it's part of your plan. If you lease it out and you want to write off that, right? Like say you get somebody, a renter in there, you can only use like a certain percentage?
So we can take 75% of that lease to basically offset the entire mortgage payment when you go to qualify for the new one. So it's basically for your debt to income ratios. It's basically like that property does not exist. Now, a couple of changes have happened. Before, all we had to do was we just had to get a lease. Perfect.
We went through this, Brian. We went through this a couple months ago with me.
Yep, exactly. With your same situation. Now we've got to get the lease. We've also got to show that that tenant has given you first month and security deposit into your bank account. So we've got to source that those funds are in there so that it's a legitimate lease at that point.
Okay.
Right.
So what I'm hearing is,
and then like Adam, my situation was just a little different, right? So my house, that my primary residence is paid off, right? So then I wanted to go into another property. And Brian, when we talked as well, I was looking at that route, I can use 75% of my income property also towards buying power, also towards my new home, correct?
Correct. So if you have existing rental properties, then you can use the full 75% of whatever that lease is as income for a new property. Now, if you don't have rental properties existing, then you can only use up to 75% to offset that existing mortgage payment that you have. So let's say, give you a situation. I've got a 2% rate. My mortgage payment's only $1,500 per month. This house is going to rent for $3,000 per month. Well, the most credit we can give if you don't have existing rental properties is you can only get $1,500 to basically wipe out that existing debt that you have when you're qualifying for another one. Now, if you do own rental properties, we can take the full 75% of that $3,000 lease as income credit.
So I think it's time to put that bow on it real quick. I want you to pull out your crystal ball, Brian. A lot of people have watched you in our past videos over the last year or two. We like to do those quarterly or every 6-month updates with where the market's going, what we're seeing happening. A lot of people are sitting on the sidelines still, man, from 2-3 years ago saying rates are going to drop again. It's not the right time for me to jump in, and that's okay. Maybe it's not perfect for everybody, but you shouldn't sit on the sideline waiting for something to happen. You should be proactive, and as long as you have that knowledge and it makes sense for you, then it's time to jump in. But what can we look forward to? And I know that it's a little bit cloudy still. That crystal ball is never perfect, but what do you think is going to happen over the next 6 months or let's just say through the end of the year? What are you kind of predicting? What are you seeing, and what's going on in the atmosphere there for 2024?
So here's what I think is going to happen for real estate. Obviously, let's focus on Tampa area, right? Real estate's always local. There's no national index. It's only local. That's the only thing that matters. Rates, realistically, I think they probably drop towards the end of the year as the economy gets worse. Maybe we're called in a recession. Fed is looking for this soft landing is their verbiage. I think it's going to be tough to hit a soft landing with all the factors going on, but realistically, we probably see rates drop. I would say maybe low to mid 6s by the end of the year. 2025, probably a little bit lower, but Obviously, we've got to factor in, there's going to be some job loss. We go into recession, we're gonna see some layoffs, particularly from bigger companies.
Yeah.
I do think that property values will hold for right now. Obviously, the longer that we're in this cycle, the more pent-up demand there is, which means once those rates drop, people enter back in. I mean, the market's going to explode at that point. I have literally hundreds of people pre-approved, docs in, we're ready to go, we're ready to make an offer, just sitting on the sidelines, waiting for something to happen. Maybe prices drop, rates drop, affordability increases. I do think for investment properties, realistically in our market, I think rents pull back. I really think they do. There's a massive amount of supply of multifamily developments that are getting ready to hit the market. And what's going to happen when that hits? Huge amount of supply enters into the market. They give concessions to get them leased up. That all of a sudden slides the comps for rental value. So I think rents actually drop down a little bit. Also, I think housing payments become more affordable. So when rents drop, realistically, it's going to affect housing payments as well as like a sliding scale. So I think payments overall, whether you're renting or buying, do get cheaper towards the end of the year and probably more so into 2025. But I think real estate values will hold within the same range that we're in. Maybe they dip 5%. It just depends, because you've got some people that they have to sell. And if they finally drop their price enough, well, that sale now is under market for the neighborhood. That becomes a comp for all the other properties within the neighborhood. So I think there's going to be those little outliers there. I don't think that we see a spike in foreclosures or short sales. I don't see it. I think real estate's going to hold steady. Rates will drop. Massive amount of people influxing into the market, which realistically at that point, I think it's going to push values higher.
Yeah, we've always talked about those golden handcuffs, right? People that are they're tied to their 2.5% to 3% interest rate. They don't want to let that go to a 7%, but they still really want to sell that house and get into something new because it's just the time, whether it be their kids went off to college, now they're empty nesters with this big old home. Maybe they're baby boomers looking to like downsize. Maybe they're, a family of 3 that are, that now are 4 and they need a 4th bedroom or they need things like that. And so, or they're just working from home and now they need more space. They need an office. There's reasons to move, but it just doesn't feel right to let go of that 2.5 to 7. Mm-hmm. But like you said, as it comes down to 5, I think you said this in a past video, for every 1% the interest rate comes down, how many buyers are on the market?
For every 1% interest rates come down, 5 million more people across the country become eligible to buy.
5 million. So I know this was hyper local, but we got 1,000 people moving to Florida a day and 150 to Tampa a day. Mm-hmm. So when you say, 2% is 10 million buyers on the market, we're getting a lot of those people, right? I also think that the local inventory, the resale inventory, we focus a lot on new construction because there's a lot of inventory there, but on the resale side, things will start to blossom. They'll start to open up.
Right.
The buyers are going to come in heavy and the sellers are going to start to blossom. So I don't think that we're necessarily going to be like, buyer's market. I think it'll be a little bit of a balanced market, still maybe lean seller's market because it's just Tampa, hyper local. And again, because of that, and because of the jobs are strong here anyway, I think that, we might have a recession outside of real estate. And I think we're in a recession in real estate right now, you could say.
I agree.
But in recessions, it doesn't mean that the prices dive. People always think 2008, around there where prices are crashing. That doesn't always happen. If you look back historically at recessions in real estate, it dips a little bit, it plateaus, but it also rebounds pretty strong. And I think a healthy market would be 5-6%. I think that a healthy market would be a 2 to 5%, 2 to 4% increase per year in real estate. It's even okay to plateau for a while. Let incomes catch up. Let everything else in the market kind of settle in. And recessions are good because it resets us. It humbles, everybody out there that's just overspending. So at the end of the day, there's time and place to buy. There's a time and place to rent. It's a great decision to hold on to your house and as investment, but sometimes it's not right for you, right? There's a lot of back and forth with all this. And I think it all boils down to what's right for you and your family and what's right for you and your lifestyle. So choosing the best area, choosing the right price point and really marrying the payment, not the interest rate. That's the way to go. But, making that best decision for you and your family. So guys, this is kind of wrapping up. We're putting that bow on this podcast. I hope you've gotten some really golden nuggets out of this, you know, some good information from Bryan. Bryan, thank you. Phil, as always, thanks for joining us and giving us.
Thanks for having us, guys. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for the stories and scenarios and everything else. And we're wrapping this one up. But guys, every Wednesday we're doing a podcast. Towards the end of the month, we're going to try to squeeze in a live so that we can answer some of your questions and answers. So please join us. And until that next video, I'll catch you later.